Okay, we're going to start out with putting our first placement stitch down. Okay, the next thing we're going to want to do is on this side of that placement stitch is 1/4 inch to the left. You can make a couple of little marks. That is going to be where you're going to place your fabric because you need to allow for a seam allowance. The first piece we're going to take and place down is going to be this red piece. Place it where you've marked your seam allowance, and then also look from the top of the line to the bottom of the lines here for that placement stitch, and make sure that this edge here is evenly spaced. And then we're going to put our stitch that's going to hold this piece of fabric into place. If you want to, at this point, you can remove from the hoop and trim these seams here down a little bit, or you can leave them as they are. And then the next piece of fabric we're going to put into place is going to be our white piece. Now you're going to want to maybe at first lay this down so you know that that's the direction that fabric's going to go. And then we're going to flip this over like this on top of this one. And it's going to stitch this one into place. And then you'll fold this piece of fabric back. Okay, after you fold your fabric back, it's going to stitch across the top and along the side edge. You might want to hold it a little bit. The next piece of fabric is going to be our blue piece. When it's finished stitching, it'll go this direction like this. What we're going to want to do is flip it over on top like this, and then stitch that down into place. Okay, now that it has stitched this in place, we're going to fold this fabric back this way. You want to make sure you have a seam allowance here and a seam allowance here from that placement stitch. If you don't, you can unstitch this and then put the fabric back on and move it back that way a little bit so that'll give it more to be able to fold over. You can go ahead and press this finger pressed or with an iron if you need to. And then we'll stitch that in place. The next piece of fabric is going to be the red one. If you lay it this way, you'll know you've got it going the correct direction, and then you're going to flip it upside down here. Make sure it's centered from right to left and right on the edge of that other one with the seam allowance about 1/4 of an inch. And then it's going to stitch this one into place. Pull this back. Give that a nice good press. And then it's going to do a stitch to hold that down. One is going to be the white piece of fabric, so let me get that. We're going to lay this white one like this so we know we have it going in the proper direction. Then we're going to flip it over this way. Now this has got a little bit more than 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm not going to line it all the way up to the red. I'm going to leave a little bit of space there. Get that lined up. And now we're going to stitch this one down into place. Okay, now this would be the time to take this out and trim this a little bit so it has 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to be bringing this and folding it back and stitching this in place. Okay, we've got our seam allowance trimmed and this pressed back, so let's stitch this piece down. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and put our next piece of fabric down, and that's going to be the blue piece. It's going to be going like this when it's finished, so we need to flip that over this way. Now on this, you want to make sure that you're going 1/4 inch from the stitching line here over here, and 1/4 inch or so from this stitching line here across over this way. You don't want to go all the way over. You need to make sure that when this gets flipped back in place after this is stitched down, that you're going to have enough fabric for the seam allowance on this side. So carefully align this. Kind of look that you've got like 1/4 inch seam allowance going from this side over here on the right. Let's go ahead and stitch this blue piece down in place now. then what you'll do next is you'll fold this back, give that a nice good press. And then we're going to go ahead and stitch this into place. And on this one, I've got a nice amount of a seam allowance here. So we're going to switch now to our gold metallic thread, and then it's going to do the quilting stitch on top of this project. So let's go ahead and get our quilting started. This is going to go ahead and stitch out the top part and then move into place so that it will stitch out the bottom part. So I'll continue on stitching this and I'll come back with further instructions. We have now got our two blocks stitched together and the embroidery design stitched on top of our blocks. We're ready to start piecing these pieces together so we can make our pillow. The first thing we're going to want to do now is to trim around the edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you're going to get your ruler, line up your 1/4 inch mark with that outside stitching line. Get that as accurate as you can. And then you can use your rotary blade to trim that off. Okay, and we're going to do that on all 4 sides. Then after you've trimmed this first one, you're also going to do the same on the second one. So you're going to take your second one and you're going to trim that the same as this one was trimmed. Then I'll be right back with you. You should have the edges all trimmed around now with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this is the direction that you're going to want to lay down your pieces. And you're going to fold them on top one another like this. And then we're going to clip them together. You want to make sure that these center pieces here line up so that when you stitch that together and open it, the seam lines are all in alignment. And then line up the end down here. And you can use pins or clips to hold all of this together. At this point, take it to the sewing machine, and then we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance all along this edge here. You should now have both sides of your block stitched together so that now we've got a completed block. And if you have lined up your center pieces You should have your points meeting very nicely like this. Then go ahead and turn your block over and press those seam allowances open so that when we make our project, that seam allowance will lay flat. And the next thing we're going to do is attach our sashings along the side edges all the way around. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and start sewing our sashings onto our pillow block. I'm going to take one of the 3 1/4 by 13 inch pieces and put it on one end. Take the other one and put it on the opposite side here, and then we'll go ahead and clip those on right on the edge there. Now I had you cut them a little longer than they needed to be so that after we sew it on we can square it up, because if we cut it too short you may not have enough fabric to make sure that your pieces are going to square up nicely. So after we get these clipped, you're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the edge here and another 1/4 inch seam allowance along the edge here. And then we'll fold this back open on both sides. Take your ruler and lay it in place, and then lining it up with the edge here, you will go ahead and trim off the excess on both ends so that it is all nice and even. And you'll do the same on the other side. You'll line it up with the edge of your block and trim off the excess on the other end here. And then we will go ahead and add on our other 2 sashing pieces. So sew these 2 pieces on and trim them so that they're squared up. So we should now be finishing up squaring off our block. Just line up your ruler, cut off that excess fabric, and then we've got our borders all nice and even all around. Now we're going to take our 2 longer sashing pieces and lay them on the opposite sides. And you're going to want to hold those in place as well. And make sure when you're sewing that you've got those edges lined up all the way across. And then you're going to line this one up here. And again, that fabric is going to extend beyond the ends just a little bit. We want to make sure we have enough fabric. So when you finish doing your 1/4 inch seam allowance along this edge here and along this edge here, you're going to do the same thing, is fold this back, press it open, and then trim off the excess fabric here so that we've got a nice finished square. So go ahead and pin these on or clip them on in place, stitch them in place, and trim off the excess. Then we'll start working on the backing for our pillow. We have finished sewing all of the sashing pieces to our block. They're all now trimmed up, so we've got a nice finished square. The next thing we're going to do is work on our backing piece, and we're going to have 2 pieces cut at 12 by 18 inches. Now on the long 18-inch side, I went ahead and sewed a real long stitch that's a 1/4 inch from the edge. You can, if you want, measure it, but I just thought this would be a lot faster for me to do, because what we're going to do now then is put our fabric right side down, and then on a ironing mat or your ironing board, you're going to just fold on that stitching line I did, or a 1/4 inch seam that you can mark somehow, and then we're going to just roll this over and take an iron, and then we're going to just press this down into place. This is going to make the hem, and we only need to do this on one long edge. You're going to continue this on the entire length, and you'll take this to the sewing machine and stitch real close to this edge here on both of the pieces that you have. And after you have folded this and sewn it in place, we'll come back and show you how to attach the backing to the front of your pillow block. Okay, we have gone ahead and top stitched along that edge and made our nice little hem. What you're going to want to do now is lay one of the pieces down, lining up the edge here with this seam towards the center of your block, and then you'll line up the other edge along here with that hem seam up towards the center of the block, and these will overlap one another. Now we're going to want to make sure we pin these two lined up edges carefully. Let me finish pinning this one. I'll finish pinning this edge here. Now we're going to want to carefully turn this over, because as you can see here now, we have an edge that extends on this end and as well as on this end. So we're going to take our ruler and our rotary blade. We're going to trim off the excess so that this lines up, so that when we go to sew our 1/4 inch seam allowance, we'll be able to do that. So now we've got that side squared up. We'll go rotate this, line that up, and now we'll have this side squared up. And then you can go ahead and pin along this edge and the other one, and then go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Then that will get our two sides sewn together. And then if you want, you can go ahead, if you have any bulk on your corner, just nick off the little corner piece and then turn your pillow block right sides out. So go ahead and pin this up, trim off your excess, and sew them together. Okay, I've got all of my seams sewn, and I've trimmed my corner just a little bit there. Now you're going to just take this and turn this so that we've got the right sides of our pillow cover going correct direction. And take time before you stuff your pillow to push the corner points out so they're nice and neat. And see, one flap is going to go towards the inside here, and then the other flap is going to come on the outside. Just go ahead and finish making sure those corners are nice, and then you'll get your pillow stuffing, you know, whatever you have for your pillow insert, and fit it in here, and you'll have a beautiful completed pillow cover. And you can take this same pattern design and just change out the color combinations and it would just be really pretty for something for spring, fall, or even Christmas time, just by the color choices that you make. You can also take this and make several of these blocks and join them together and make a beautiful table runner. I hope you've enjoyed this project. Thanks for watching, and look forward to some more projects I have coming ahead. Bye now.